Hello, and welcome to the AAMFT podcast, your all-access pass to the latest news, developments, and thought leaders in the world of systemic therapy. We strive to relate, educate, and innovate, one episode at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Eli Karam, and we're brought to you by the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. Our podcast explores topics that relationship-based therapists care about. In addition to featuring unique conversations and interviews with established experts, our show provides information and education on direct practice and emerging trends in the MFT profession. For more information, please visit us at aamft.org. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Eli back with you. Happy New Year. Welcome to the second year of the AAMFT podcast, where we strive to relate, educate, and innovate one episode at a time. We are committed to diversity within our field of couple and family therapy, systemic thinking, and what a great way to start off the new year with an episode talking about the minority student experience, both master's and doctoral. And we have some great guests to do that with today. Leslie Anderson is a licensed marriage and family therapist from the great state of Mississippi and a clinical fellow of AAMFT. She earned her BA in psychology from Tougaloo College in 2009. That's a private historically black college in Jackson, Mississippi. And her MS MFT from the University of Southern Mississippi in 2012. Currently, Leslie is a fourth-year PhD student at the University of Georgia studying human development and family science with an emphasis in MFT. She's practicing from a social justice lens in her work. Her long-term goal is to return to Mississippi and develop an MFT training program at a historically black college or university in the state. She's committed to seeing the field of MFT flourish as a more diverse, inclusive, and multicultural profession. She's joined by her colleague, Sheeza Mohsin. Sheeza is a mom to two wonderful kids. She has a PhD in family therapy and currently is an adjunct faculty member at Texas Women's University, where diversity is her favorite class to teach. She's an LMFT and an LPC who focuses on serving multicultural families and teenagers. She's currently serving on the South Lake Library Board and is a board member for IQRA. That's an interfaith dialogue organization within the Muslim community. After Sheeza and Leslie, we'll be joined briefly by AAMFT's own Jermaine Lowery to talk about the Minority Fellowship Program. We are on the AAMFT podcast. I am pleased to be joined today by Leslie Anderson and Sheeza Mohsin, and we're going to be talking about the MFT minority experience, all around cultural diversity, both in MFT training programs and how to move the field forward. So welcome, ladies. And the first question, as always, we get to know a little bit about our guest. What initially interested you in MFT as a profession?
So thank you for the opportunity to share my experience. I think my story into how I got interested in marriage and family therapy may or may not be a little bit unorthodox, but I always say that I really didn't know what I was getting myself into with MFT. My bachelor's is in psychology, and so I knew that I was interested in working with couples. In particular, I was really wanting to get involved in like premarital work, helping couples to work through issues of infidelity and various other challenges. And so really the language, marriage and family therapy, really drew me into the field. But then actually, once I was accepted into my master's program and really gained a deeper level of understanding about systems theory and what that really means, it opened my eyes up to a whole new world. And so I came in with a very, particular focus. But since that time, it's grown quite a bit. But yeah, it was that initial interest in wanting to do couples work for the most part.
And right now you're a doctoral student at COAMFT accredited program at UGA, University of Georgia, correct?
Correct. I
Great.
am in my third year in the program.
Outstanding. And Sheeza, you have just completed your doctoral degree. Tell us about your journey. How did you get into MFT?
All right, so it was interesting, and I'm very grateful that I landed in this space. I actually made a career transition. So I was a human resources professional and initially destined toward industrial organizational psychology. And what led me to be very interested in MFP was looking for a practitioner to help myself and people in my community when they were struggling in different stages in their life, and finding lack of practitioners that would be representative of that population. And it was very interesting to me as I experienced family therapy on the receiving side of it, to see that there was an opportunity for understanding different minority populations. At least that was limited to my experience. The other thing that had always interested me was the kind of work I did in human resources. I used to get a lot of snide remarks, I will call them, and sometimes great feedback saying, you want to make sure you manage your boundary because you're not a therapist. And it used to intrigue me, and I was like, what the heck do they do? And as I learned more and I got more exposed to the field, I kind of fell in love with it, and I knew that that was my calling.
That's great. When we think of our field, when you take a course, a lot of listeners of our podcast will be young professionals, either therapists or training or preclinical fellows. And our field has come a long way as far as diversity and cultural competency. But some of our classic models, when we think of early family therapists, as very patriarchal, not diverse. What has been your experience as far as a minority voice, cultural diversity within the field of MFT? And was it like you thought, or once you entered into it, was it different than you expected it to be?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of my early clinical work, because I got my master's in 2012, so I took about 4 years off between my master's and PhD. And during that time, I worked primarily in communities doing school-based therapy, doing in-home therapy, primarily with Black families below the federal poverty line. And so there were a number of different stressors and factors at play with these families. And there were a number of times where I felt really frustrated in trying to use some of the systemic models that I had been trained to use with these families, and just felt like I was running into barriers because there were larger systems at play that were impacting these families. And so that really encouraged me to be more reflexive in my own clinical practice and sort of engage in this process of self-interrogation, so to speak, about the models that I was trying to use, and really figuring out ways to adapt the models and really apply a critical lens to my work in order to best meet the needs of the families that I was working with.
Yeah, I like that. I often say our clients have enough issues. They should not have to accommodate to us as the therapist, our way of working. We should be able to flexibly accommodate to them, including their cultural background and their communities and the context of which they live. So you found that out very early in your training. Same questions.
Eli, for me, I started noticing the positivity of the efforts that are being made to increase awareness for minority experiences and for training. So that has been very heartening to see the emphasis, to see the growth in research and publication, and to see the the growing effort in an intentionality in attempting to groom as well as nurture minority professionals in this field. What I also noticed that I didn't realize was that we still have such a long way to go, and where we are, as I see it, is that we're reaching out to either poverty or privilege, where people who are struggling and really challenging, I guess there's a lot more organization in help and support at that level. And I see that people who have privilege have a lot more means and resources to get access to the service, as well as to the profession and field and all the rich knowledge that it brings. I feel that there is a huge opportunity that lies in between the diversity of needs that we have for minorities in between. And there's a spectrum of students and professionals and clients that fall in that category, and we have a lot of opportunities to learn and grow in that space. So that's what I'm noticing.
We certainly do, and hopefully we can talk about this on two levels today. So let's talk about from a MFT education perspective, as far as your experience in the classroom and MFT training, and then the kind of parallel process to therapists working with clients as it comes to issues of diversity and race. So whose responsibility do you think it is to initiate conversations about race and race dynamics within our training programs? Is it the responsibility of the faculty? Is it the students? Is it both? What do you think?
I would agree with Sheeza. I think as a discipline, we have made strides in terms of addressing issues related to race and multiculturalism, but there's still, efforts that need to be made. And because of that, I do feel like within our training programs, because of the power differential that exists between students or trainees and faculty or supervisors, that the onus really is on that faculty member or that clinical supervisor to initiate those conversations. From my experience, it's typically situations where the tension is felt. It's sort of like, the elephant in the room. It's right there. Everybody is aware that there is a conversation or there is dialogue that needs to be had, but there's still some reluctance to really go there and address some of these things in a very direct way. And so, again, I think just because students are in like that one down position, and there may be times where the student, feels particularly compelled to address something. But in my own personal opinion, I do think their responsibility still lies with the supervisor or the faculty person.
So for you, the faculty member, the supervisor has to acknowledge it and normalize it, much like a therapist would normalize it for a client in order to begin the dialogue. What do you think, Sheeza?
I would concur with Leslie to a large degree. I'm remembering the quote of our panel discussion that Leslie had put on our slide, and Leslie helped me out here, where there's something about the person with the privilege to be blamed, but both people being responsible. So that's the added element for me, that I believe that it's there is no such thing as like 100%. I think that there is a part a student can play, but when you don't have that power, and the person in the room with the privilege, with the power, with the influence is carrying that, there's a power differential in the room. So definitely the faculty has more responsibility. Does the student not have responsibility? Absolutely they do. They need to respond and have to take a step to have the courage to voice whatever they can within the boundaries of feeling safe. So I think there is a small part to play, but it's so subjective to each student's narrative, each student's situation. I think that there's a huge opportunity to learn about this very big weight that is in the room, this white elephant, as Leslie was talking about, that nobody names. So the responsibility may lie with both, but the larger amount must always be with the person with the power, with the influence, with the privilege.
What do you think are some kind of concrete steps that faculty members could take to better support racial minority students and to kind of start this dialogue? Because educators will be listening to this podcast too, and you all have both a student perspective and you will be future MFT educators as well, so you can kind of see it from both sides. What are some steps faculty members could take?
I think what you just mentioned about really normalizing some of these issues for me is really key. I'm very fortunate to have mentors that are that have a wealth of experience and years of experience in the field of MFT, and so periodically I'll reach out to some of those people, or they might reach out to me. And I remember very early on having a conversation with one of those mentors, and they asked me specifically about my experience in my program here at UGA, with the awareness that this is a historically white institution. And so I'm literally on a campus of about just under 40,000 students, and about 7% of that 40,000 are identified as African American. And so they were just very explicit in asking me about what my experience had been like so far. And I was a little bit taken aback, but at the same time, very appreciative, because this was not a mentor of color. This was actually an older white man asking me about my experience as an African American woman in a majority white space as a minority. And so I appreciated that. And I think it's simple things, seemingly simple things, like normalizing it, having very explicit, direct conversations with minority students about their experiences very early on. Because I think oftentimes during, interviews, it feels welcoming, it feels warm, and I'm very fortunate to be in a program where that's true. But it's also, I have to exist outside of my program as well in this larger institution. And I think engaging in conversations with students, initiating conversations with students is a good first step to take. And I think once you do that, students will feel more comfortable in really sharing what their experiences are like.
Oh, so well said. I'm a faculty member in the only MFT program, accredited MFT program housed within a school of social work. So inherent are social work values and working with underserved and minority populations. And I just, listening to what you said, sometimes faculty members forget to ask, especially if they're in the majority. They forget what it is like being in the minority experience, or they feel asking potentially makes the student uncomfortable. But in this case, you were asked by a white male mentor, and it was welcome for you. So you believe that faculty members should directly inquire, even if they are in the majority.
I do. And I agree with Sheeza that so much of this is, subjective. And it may very well differ, depending on the person. But I think it's all in your approach. I think really being deliberate, just like we do with clients, to build rapport and to really establish a good relationship with students. That's key. But I think as a minority student, especially if you're new to a program, you're still testing the waters. You don't really know what might be considered acceptable versus what might not be. And again, I'm in this one down. And so I'm trying to learn and to adapt and to adjust. But I think by initiating that conversation, like, you're letting me know that we're in a space where it's okay for us to have these types of dialogue. And so for me, absolutely, I say let's go there and let's talk.
No, I like to hear that. I also like to think of it as like, it's not just like checking the box. Okay, I asked. It's not a one-time conversation. It's an ongoing dialogue during your development in a training program. Talk a little bit about that, Leslie, as far as how you keep that dialogue going and evolving that conversation.
I think there has to be Intentionality on both sides. Quite honestly, I think as a student, we do bear some responsibility, absolutely, to be open to that, and then recognizing that it is a part of developing professionally. It is a part of developing as a clinician. Because the way that I think about it, if there is a hesitancy to engage in these types of conversation with other professionals, then it begs the question of like how these things are being addressed in the therapy room with clients. Like we know the issues of diversity, be it gender, be it race, be it sexual orientation, all these things are always at play in the room. And so I think both the student and the faculty have to be deliberate about doing these things and recognizing that it is a part of growth and development as a practitioner.
What do you think, Sheeza?
I would think that the process has to be very structured. Just building on what Leslie has shared, I would agree with all of that. I feel that when the process is structured, it brings accountability to faculty members, and they have to be more mindful of making sure that it is a part of their instructional, their academic interaction with students. And so to Leslie's point, making sure that not only do they structure the course or the interaction or the supervision with a framework and saying, there is a power differential and I want you to notice that, but then doing a midterm check-in to say, has there been it? And I want to see how this experience was for you, to make sure that I am learning from this and I knew how to support you and what I could do different to make sure that you felt safe and you felt like you had the best learning environment possible. What could I have done differently to support you better? When you are noticing that students of the majority group are speaking more than students of a minority group in a classroom setting, or if there is less participation from certain students, to really reach out to them individually to find out and not assume that they're more introverted and that's why they're not talking. To check in is to own one's privilege, because let alone a regular student who may not have that issue. You compound that with a minority student who might have a lot more things going on for them in terms of feeling that power differential. It does impact participation, the academic experience, in an MFP program, learning. And I feel that as faculty, we are modeling for students in so many ways how they have to carry themselves in the field, in the profession, with their clients. And so if we cannot offer those safe spaces in the classroom, then there is something we need to do inwardly to really redesign how we instruct, how we model communication and interaction with our students.
So we agree it should be intentional, and we agree it should be an ongoing dialogue, not a one-time thing. What do you all think about the format? Because sometimes in the context of either a class or a supervision group, that the minority student could feel further stigmatized if it is a group dialogue versus a one-on-one conversation. However, the importance of educating that whole cohort or that system about these dynamics, about race and diversity, seems very important. What are your all's thoughts on the context, an individual dialogue versus a group discussion?
I think a lot of it really it depends, right? The answer that we love to give, but I think is true. It depends on the context. I think it can also depend on the student and the dynamics that already exist within that group. It's a tricky balance. I've had experiences where I felt like something occurred within the group setting and it needed to, like, the rupture happened in a group, and I feel like the repair needed to happen within the group as well. Going back to what Sheeza just said about modeling, I think that the faculty member or supervisor, can model to the trainees in that setting that this is how we address these types of issues, or this is one way, that we can address these types of issues when they come up. But if it's ever a question of that student's emotional safety, if it's ever a question of whether or not, that student may feel further marginalized, I would say err on the side of caution. But, depending on all of those factors, I think it could be successful in either setting. There are times where it might need to happen one-on-one, but there are also times where something might need to happen in a group where each person can walk away, gaining something from that experience.
What do you think, Sheeza?
For me, I know what I have done for my classes. I've been teaching for a couple of years. In my first class, an introduction, I make noticing diversity a part of the structure. And that doesn't go for just the minority student, it goes for all students. So when I set it up as part of my framework, I am telling students to introduce themselves and to share a little bit about themselves, and also to share what is different about it. And then sometimes, depending on the nature of the class, I also ask them the question of if you can share when you felt like you were treated differently. And a lot of times, I will have a minority student share about an adverse experience, and a white student talk about how they could be coming from a family of divorce, or they could be socioeconomically disadvantaged, or there could be a personal challenge that they experienced, or have a sibling with a disability. And so many different things come up, but it is generically a lot of rich conversation that comes out, and immediately the first thing everybody notices is that everyone is different and not everyone is privileged. There's something that many of us may be struggling with. So I really am a big advocate of starting outright with that, because it creates a very humbling environment, and I believe that that is a safer environment for minority students, because there's nobody on a pedestal, somebody from an adverse experience or somebody from a marginalized community. It's kind of a playing field where we're all meeting with some challenge that we struggled with. That kind of creates a possibility where future conversations can take place. Now, as far as singling out a minority student to say, well, how adverse was your experience since you are? Absolutely not. And I think most of us know the answer to that. But checking in can happen in so many different ways. Giving opportunities for those discussions to see when a student will take a bite at that or have the courage to participate is, I think, the job of professionals who are in that position of power.
And I like what you're saying about instead of waiting until tension arises or there's a problem, to normalize it at the beginning of your course or your supervision group. Both of you all have great ideas. We'll have a lot of supervisors and educators listen to this podcast. What are some other concrete tips or things that educators can do concretely to kind of invite or normalize this dialogue?
I agree with Sheeza. I really like that idea of setting the stage at the very beginning, so that when things do come up, like people are already somewhat aware of how these things will be addressed. And so it's not where you just wait until some type of, rupture occurs. So I think more concrete ways is really moving away from this sort of like check box mentality that some people sort of adhere closely to. It's like the diversity, checklist. And I think if we're not careful, we can sort of fall into that way of being. But I think it has to be something that you take very seriously. That it's more it's more than just part of what makes, the program accredited. It's because we address diversity, and we teach cultural competency to our students. I think it really has to be more so about who you are as a person, and how you identify, really a part of your values and your belief system, where we really embrace differences in religion. We embrace differences in race and ethnicities. And so, yeah, I mean, it's in that way, I think it's more organic. It's a more natural way of being in how you really present yourself to the world. But I can't emphasize enough how important I think it is to really cultivate that relationship with students from the very beginning, and then just continuing to be intentional, having those check-ins, but not in a way that feels that doesn't feel genuine, because you don't want students to feel like, well, you're attending to me because you feel like you have to, but it comes from a place of authenticity, because I think students are able to tell when it's not.
Yeah, students can tell, clients can tell, like you said, it's not a just check the box kind of phenomenon. It's an ongoing dialogue. And you mentioned that term, one down. It is the supervisor, the educator going one down as well, of not pretending to understand the experience of the minority student, and like that mentor engaged you, asking you and being curious about your experience. So we've all in training settings seen majority therapist in training in the room with minority clients, but they don't know how to discuss these issues we're talking about today. What do you think are the blocks in a clinical setting now? What do you think are the blocks that stop these conversations about race from happening in a therapy room with majority therapist and their minority clients?
I do think for a lot of people, touching race, having those conversations is still very much taboo. Unfortunately, people are afraid to say the wrong thing, to do the wrong thing. And so it's almost like, I don't want to offend anyone. And so to avoid that, I won't even go there. And it's often to the detriment of our clients, unfortunately. Asking questions, acknowledging your own gaps in knowledge and understanding, I think is critical, because there will always be things that we don't know for a number of different reasons. And so asking questions, being transparent in your curiosities. But I think we also have to be careful that we don't do it in a way where it's the client's responsibility, or the client feel as though it's their responsibility to educate the therapist. So there is like this very, subtle distinction between doing your own work as a therapist, but also having this stance of curiosity with clients. Like, we should have some knowledge base about various cultures and various ethnic groups, but we know that within group differences are always there. And so we equip ourselves, we gain that knowledge, but still when we're working with a client, we have to be very direct in acknowledging the differences that exist between the two of us. And it's no different from me as a Black woman working with a client who is also Black, but maybe from a different social class, and really acknowledging that there is a difference in our levels of experiences, but not in a way, again, that the client feels marginalized. I think it does so much when we can acknowledge those differences and then reflect on how it's impacting the therapeutic relationship.
I think you're so right on. Many young therapists think it will hurt the alliance if they ask, but it actually helps and normalizes. And we have a lot of good research and just clinical wisdom that speaks to exactly what you're talking about. What do you think about that, Sheeza?
I definitely agree with Leslie and would like to just build on that. I think some of it is around feeling safe to have those conversations, and safety inevitably becomes a side effect or a consequence of being knowledgeable in that. So when the majority group is not well equipped with the information, it becomes an unsafe topic because you don't know where it's going to go, and it may come in the way of having those transparent conversations. And I would also like to add that onus also belongs a little bit to some of us, where, a huge component of growth in this area and making sure that minorities have a fair and equitable experience in academic programs, in careers and professions, is also to not have a very aggressive approach when we talk about minorities, to have a more collaborative language, to identify and make sure that we are honoring and acknowledging, majority group leaders, professionals who are indeed inclusive and really exemplify and model what inclusion means and what using your privilege to really benefit a marginalized community means. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to do a better job in that area, so the collaborations and the partnerships can be stronger. That would encourage them, the majority group, to do more.
How do you think, as a profession, MFT, how do we get more qualified minority candidates to explore the profession and decide to become a marriage and family therapist?
I do think we should take a more proactive role in building partnerships with minority serving institutions. And really, for some students of color, I think introducing the field of marriage and family therapy, I think we would all agree as a profession that compared to some other disciplines like social work or licensed professional counselors, people still don't know about the field of MFT, unfortunately, or they have a very surface level, knowledge around the work that we do as systems thinkers. And that's even more true for people of color. And so I think, I know with the Minority Fellowship Program, part of what the staff does there is they actually make trips out to different programs, basically advertising for the fellowship. I just wonder if, as an organization, we could in some way do the same. When there are recruitment fairs, when there are graduate school fairs, being more intentional about going out to those places and letting students know about the work that we do. I think there's a potential there to attract more students. Something that, is part of my very long-term goal is to actually develop an MFT program at a historically Black college or university, because one does not yet exist. And I do know of other MFTs of color who have, similar goals and interests. And I think, again, that is a huge way to bring more diversity into our field. And I think moving forward, as we become a more diverse nation, it's going to be key to our relevance in society. As we continue to progress as a nation and become more diverse, I think as a field, we have to do the same in diversifying professionals.
So well said. What do you?
I think there's a lot that can be done with encouraging students to be interested in MFP programs. I think we, to Leslie's point, we have a great opportunity to exposing more people with the profession. We also have a great opportunity to see what is keeping people away from the profession. I've always wondered, this is such a great need. It's a great profession to be in. It compensates well. Why aren't more people doing it? So I would be very interested in finding out more, and I think that we need to know what is it that's coming in our way to be more successful, to be more prevalent as a choice, and work on those areas. I think that for minority students especially, because of the systemic perspective, this program would and should be a preferred choice, because the cultural components and the multiculturalism that systemic family therapy programs provide is not provided in so many other different sister or partner fields. And so I would be very curious to find out and see where we get from there.
I also think one of the power of family therapy was and has always been was the actual work, seeing it being done. And I feel like as an educator, good training tapes of minority students working with minority populations is essential in this recruitment and this development of an MFT brand. And I think you all are both right in the sense that, recruiting very early on, going to HBCs, historically black colleges, what a great opportunity that would be. And you did mention, Leslie, the Minority Fellows Program, and have someone on this very podcast talking about that and what that's about. Just say a little bit about your experience and how the MFP program has helped your career and why it's a good opportunity for our minority students out there to take advantage of.
Absolutely. I can't overstate the impact that the Minority Fellowship Program has made on my development as an MFT. I feel extremely blessed and fortunate to have been selected as a fellow for the past 3 consecutive years. And in terms of the networking opportunities, I mean, there is no comparison. Being able to have exposure to MFTs, true experts and scholars in the field, to have one-on-one consultations with former, editors of journals and getting their feedback about manuscripts and just professional development in general. Those are experiences that I don't think I would have had an opportunity to take advantage of had it not been for the fellowship program. And then, of course, being able to really cultivate relationships with other young MFTs literally from across the nation has been so incredibly influential in my professional as well as my personal growth. In terms of the panel that we were able to put together for the annual conference this year, we had representation from across the United States. And I thought that was like the most amazing way to really talk about, our experiences coming from different social locations. I think that made our conversation all the more rich. And then thirdly, I would say having opportunities to work with the research consultant that is a part of the MFP, who's Dr. Jared Dershey. So huge shout out to him, who's at Kansas State. He is truly amazing. I know for the vast majority of fellows, we entered our doc programs coming from master's programs that were pretty heavily clinically focused. And so now entering the world of research and publishing and learning about that process, learning about, how to deliver a good, solid presentation at a professional conference. Dr. Dershey he's been amazing. So, I mean, the quarterly webinars that we're able to have, and even beyond that, but actually being able to contact him and talk over the phone about different projects that we're working on, and then being given the opportunity to have really step-by-step instruction on quantitative research methodologies. So again, I feel incredibly blessed to have been given the opportunity to participate as a fellow. And I think for minority students in particular who often, lack multiple sources of support, that the MFP is able to meet a wide range of needs. And so it's been key in my development for sure.
I think that is outstanding. And I think the other great way to learn about the Minority Fellowship Program is talking to someone like you, Leslie, that has gone through it and benefited from it. And I know graduates of the program are very eager to talk to other people and get them on board. So we'll certainly give out your contact information at the end. And I know you would love to share with others, just like you just did, what you got out of it. I have one more question for both of you all. And I see you all met at an AAMFT conference and then collaborated and had a very well received panel at the 2018 conference in Louisville, Kentucky, and I imagine you will be back presenting at future AAMFT conferences, and I view you all as emerging leaders in this field. You know, as we're shifting from geographic based within AAMFT to topical interest networks, it does seem very relevant. And what do you think about the possibility of a minority therapist topical interest network, and what should the aims and goals of a group like that be?
I think it was the 2017 annual conference that was in Atlanta last year. There was sort of this re-emergence of what was called the Alana Group. It was an acronym that stood for, if I'm not mistaken, African American, Latin American, and maybe Asian American. But it was specifically for clinicians of color within the field of MFT. And so there was a small gathering at the 2017 annual conference, and then there was also a gathering at this year's conference in Louisville, Kentucky. And I think it's definitely evolving. The naming of the group is changing. I think now it's CFTs of color. And, you know, I was able to attend that gathering at the 2017 conference and really hearing about what people's needs and desires are for this type of subgroup or subcommittee of the larger professional organization. I do think there is the need for a students of color subgroup as well, which could be, you know, a subgroup of the CFTs of color. But I think because of the issue of power, you know, that we've talked about during this interview, that students have very unique needs. And I think from forming some type of special interest group, if you will, that will allow for more advocacy for students, that will allow the opportunity for students to really be intentional about speaking to what their needs might be within their particular programs and within the larger organization. So I think there's the advocacy piece. There's the opportunity for something more structured, where these types of issues don't sort of, you know, go unnoticed or not really talked about. I think the sheer number of people that were present at our workshop at this past conference really shows the interest that there are experiences that students are having, and there are steps that we can take as a profession to address those needs. And so I really feel like developing some type of group will provide a platform and give more structure and organization that will in turn really meet the needs of students.
Yeah, I love how you said, I mean, we think of this as a minority therapist experience, but the student experience is, as we've been talking about this hour, a subgroup of that. So they need to be enfranchised. They need to have that voice, and there's issues that affect students that are different than affect clinicians that have been out in the field practicing for some time. So I couldn't agree more with you said. Sheeza, I will give you the last word. Where do we need to go as a professional organization, the AAMFT, as far as, you know, building this dialogue around race and minority issues?
So I think I definitely agree with, and I really liked what Leslie said about differentiating between student needs and professional needs, because there is, when you become a professional, you have a little bit more influence and power, but in that food chain you still have a lot of struggles to overcome. I think as a profession, the AAMFT definitely has a lot of opportunity for growth and to evolve in general. We are very proud of this profession, and I think that there's a lot of good intentions, and I think it's time that we really start becoming more intentional with action items and to-dos in terms of really mobilizing our efforts as it comes to race and minority issues, because this is, for the United States of America, a very live issue, and it's becoming more and more pressing. I think society in so many ways can look up to AAMFT to role model how to change and how to repurpose our goals and mission and vision to really meet the needs of where we are in general as a society and in general as a field. I think diversity, race relations, minority relations definitely needs a bigger space and more seats at the table. I think it can no longer be a token, and it can no longer be the check mark on the list that you were talking about earlier on in the session. It needs to be a normal part of, and a regular and a mandatory part of our learning. I am looking forward to seeing that our continuing education does not just require ethics as a requirement to maintain our licensure, but require diversity training and minority and race relation training as part of our learning and development, because we need to notice and understand other communities at a much deeper level, and we need to be the role models for that. So I think that we have our work cut out as a professional community, and I'm looking forward to seeing great things to come from AAMFT.
I want to thank you all both for a very thoughtful, intentional, and articulate discussion, and I believe you all will go on to be important emerging professional leaders and giving voice to the minority experience. Okay, I'm pleased to be joined on the AAMFT podcast today by the director of the Minority Fellowship Program at the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, a Research and Education Foundation, Jermaine Lowery. Jermaine, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to speak with you about the Minority Fellowship Program and what an exciting and awesome opportunity the program fellowship is.
Yes, and a lot of people that have maybe heard about it but don't really understand what it is or what opportunities are available. That's what we want to just briefly here today kind of clear up. So, and we'll refer to a Minority Fellowship Program as MFP for short from time to time. So if you're a listener, don't get confused. So I guess the first thing, if I know nothing about it, what are the goals and objectives of the MFP, Jermaine?
Yes, the goals of the Minority Fellowship Program, first off, we have two. The first one being to expand the delivery of culturally competent mental health and substance abuse services to underserved minority and ethnic populations. And the second goal would be to increase the number of culturally competent marriage and family therapists. So we like to say that our objectives are the vehicles of which we choose to reach our goals. And so we have two objectives that help us to reach our interim goals, which are to provide financial support and professional guidance to grad students who are pursuing degrees in marriage and family therapist. In short, that would be those students who are going to sit for a licensure exam to become an LMFT. And the second objective would be to provide a fellowship program that's open to all MFT students who are committed and have a demonstrated experience to research about the service to ethnic minority and underserved populations.
That's great. So if I'm listening to this, what, as far as eligibility, after listening to you describe that, so I could be either a MFT master's student or a doctoral student, right?
That is correct. So you would have to be a graduate student, and as far as eligibility, you would need to be a U.S. citizen, or you would need to have a permanent residence in the U.S.
Do I need to be in an accredited program?
That is actually a great question. So the MFP Fellowship now for 4 years has been open to co-amped schools and non-co-amped schools, as well as Hawaiian schools, and also schools that would fall under HBCU that have counseling programs, and that will be in marriage and family therapy as well.
And that's great. So you said it's a 4-year window. At what point in my program, let's say I have just started my MFT program, I'm a semester in a 2-year master's program, do I need to know about this ahead of time, or at what part in my program, either master's or doctoral, can I apply to the MFP?
Yes, so we would love to be able to gather master's level students before they become a master's student. And so we have opened the application to those that are in their undergraduates in their senior year who would apply in December through January, and then hopefully get into the fellowship program and then be in the fellowship program in their master's years for 2 years. And 2 years 2-year terms are the cutoff for those that are in the master's program. However, if you are a first year's master's student, it would behoove you to connect with your university, because we work with the universities to provide the Minority Fellowship Program materials, so that way students can apply in their first year in December or January to be able to be in the fellowship year by their second year. The fellowship year runs from September the 30th all the way through September the 29th. And so because of this cycle, we would prefer that students to apply so that they can be selected as candidates for fellowships as soon as possible. And then if you're transitioning from your master's to your doctoral degree, you are more than welcome to apply while you're in your second or third year of your master's fellowship to apply for the doctoral fellowship.
And what does the application look like? If I'm curious about this, as far as preparing and being the most kind of qualified and prepared applicant, what does the application materials entail?
So the application process is very vigorous. We do a lot to post parts of the application on our website so that students can prepare for the 2-month window for the application. So first, an applicant would need to be familiarized with Fluid Review, and that is an application site that AAMFT uses to house and store application information. They would go on there, they can sign up for updates that would list any changes in the application. But once they are registered, which takes about 3 minutes to do so, they will then go on to look at the application, and they would need to get 3 letters of recommendations, which we typically say can come from an advisor or a program director. And then the third person would be a person who has witnessed or have seen you demonstrate commitment to serving underserved minority populations in the field of marriage and family therapy. However, if you're coming into the field from another field, as long as you have volunteer experience in serving underserved minority populations, then you would qualify. After that, you would then write 2 essays, which would speak to the demonstration of your commitment from your past experiences to serving underserved minority populations. And then if you're applying for the doctoral fellowship, we would ask about your research and what your future research goals are while you're going to be in the Minority Fellowship Program. So it's a pretty straightforward application. If students go on to amftfoundation.org/what-we-do/minority fellowship program, they can see the 2 essays that are posted for each upcoming year so that they can get a head start on the essays.
So that's the place to go if you're interested in more information. Could you repeat that one more time for our listeners?
Absolutely. www.amft.org/what-we-do/MFP.
What are the overall benefits of being associated with the MFP?
As the director of the MFP, I get the lovely task of seeing the students become fellows and then seeing the fellows grow through the many benefits that the Minority Fellowship Program offers underneath the foundation at AAMFT. And some of the benefits are the fellows would receive a mentor, which is someone who's going to help them develop professional skills and research skills as well throughout an entire year. Typically, we see fellows who will collaborate within research or utilizing their mentor to be able to have a job if they're a master's fellow in either a clinical setting or a government therapy and counseling uh, setting. Also, we do offer financial stipends for our fellows that would help them to alleviate the cost of going back to school. But more than that, we offer cutting edge training through a lot of AAMFT's platforms, utilizing 10AL courses, as well as paying for all expenses to additional on-site training through the many training institutes that we have. We also have our fellows to participate in the national conference, which is a great segue into meeting a lot of professionals in the marriage and family therapy field. Our doctoral level fellows really benefit from having a one-on-one research consultation that happens twice a year. We then also work with our doctoral fellows to develop research that would follow SAMHSA initiatives, and then getting them into the habit of uh, producing research materials, presenting. We see a lot of our doctoral fellows who will utilize their stipends to present at international conferences. So you have the uh, option to have international exposure for your research, which is huge for a doctoral student. Also, we have the ability to put our master's fellows through additional training that would help them in their clinical goals. And so the benefits are wonderful to being a fellow. And also, we like to say that once you're a fellow, you remain a fellow. So we typically stay in contact with a lot of our fellows who have transitioned to MFP alumni, which has a network currently of 474 alumni, which pour back into the program and then connects each fellow with premier guidance throughout their longevity of their career in marriage and family therapy.
That's awesome, and I've never met any fellow that's gone through the program that hasn't benefited from the experience, and also hasn't been, or they're always willing to talk about their experience and share, how they were mentored and what opportunities they were given because of the MFP. And I guess the last question is, once you are completed, you mentioned this kind of desire and spirit of working with underserved populations, but is there any other obligation to AAMFT after the fellowship has been completed?
Yes. So after the fellowship has completed, each student currently, that's a SAMHSA requirement under the Department of Health and Human Services, that students would continue to serve in the services to underserved minority populations for a minimum of 2 years after the fellowship year has completed, which can be extended if the fellow has not graduated. So really upon graduation, the 2-year clock would start, and that's something that's fairly new. However, fellows that do come through our program often provide a percentage of 75% of their time, either in clinical hours or research, which goes towards expanding culturally competent mental health and substance abuse services to underserved minority populations. So we love that our fellows continue the mission of the AAMFT Foundation that's wrapped up in MFP goals.
Thank you so much, Jermaine, for your time. So comes to a conclusion the first episode of our second season of 2020 of the AAMFT podcast. Thank you so much, Leslie, Sheeza, and Jermaine there. I learned so much. Lots of good things for our listeners to think about, whether you're still in your MFT program or you're out practicing the field or you're supervising. And Jermaine mentioned a lot of great information about the Minority Fellowship program. Let me just give you the latest, again, you can go to AAMFTfoundation.org. That's AAMFTfoundation.org. And you can find, that's the Research and Education Foundation. You can find the application information for the Minority Fellowship Program, commonly abbreviated as MFP. Applications are now currently open, and they will be open until February 14th, 2020 at 11:59 p.m. So there is time, and AMFT does a nice job if you're interested in this. In addition to seeing all those criteria that Jermaine mentioned, AMFT is hosting a webinar, a couple of them, to walk you through the application process if you are one of these eligible candidates for the MFP program. And I will tell you when those are. One is on January 23rd. That's a Thursday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. And there is another one on Thursday, February 6th, 8 days before the deadline, also 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. And you can join those webinars and apply right through AAMFTfoundation.org. Thank you so much for listening. We had so much great feedback in 2019, and 2020 already has some amazing installments of the podcast ready to go. I can't wait to share those with you. We'd love to hear your opinion. In fact, student response and going to a natural conference, the AAMFT annual conference, is how I first heard of Leslie and Sheeza, and they were recommended highly and really enlightening, informative guests. So we're driven by listener feedback. Easiest way to get a hold of the AAMFT, you can send an email to communications@aamft.org. You can reach me, Dr. Eli, at info@elikaram, that's ELIKARAM.com. Follow the conversation on Twitter. It's at the AAMFT, and I'm at Dr. Eli Live. The hashtag is Stay Systemic, and also the AAMFT podcast. Please like, rate, subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And we're really gaining traction and moving up in the world of mental health podcasts. Love bringing the show to you. As always, until next time, my friends, stay systemic.